Welcome to Toledo Reads. I'm your host, Charles Welch. Today we are lucky enough to be joined by a good friend of mine who I've had the pleasure of meeting some time ago, and I'm going to try to not go down the rabbit hole with this guy because we tend to get off on the same things. But welcome to the show, Mr. Ted Long. Hi, Ted. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Well, no, it's listen. This was almost not like work for me because when I get to talk to you, it's always something great.
Same here. I always enjoy our stories together.
Yeah. So tell me, and I realize in the times that we've met, I know that you do the Holy Toledo tours, but I don't know about Ted. I don't know about Ted. So are you from Toledo?
Actually, I'm not. I was born and raised in Mansfield, and we came here about 35 years ago. We were in Chicago. My wife and I were doing the train, an hour and 20-minute train ride in and out of Crystal Lake into Chicago every day.
Yeah.
And so when the offer came to come to Toledo, we came out and thought, we'll be here for a couple years. It'll be nice. And we've never left. Had plenty of opportunities to leave, but we love it here.
Wow. And it's interesting because for those who don't know, you are the man when it comes to things about Toledo. And to find out that you're not from here, it's really weird.
Well, it's fun, actually. For years, we've done the Leadership Toledo tours, a bus tour. We put about 50 people on a bus. It's a day-long regional tour, and we tell the history. And all these people come up to me afterwards, and they're like, I've grown up here, been here my whole life. I didn't know any of this. And then they always ask me, what high school did you go to? I didn't grow up here, sorry.
That's really, really crazy I'm sorry, I'm just really taken aback that you're not from here.
I consider myself a Toledoan, though. I've been here long enough, and the stories and the history here are so interesting to me, so I just dove in.
Have you always been into history?
Yeah, I grew up in a family where, we were all readers, and my mother was into local history, and my dad he was just a great storyteller, so I used to love to listen to his stories about back in the day. That always kept me focused on history.
I'm curious, now because you know a lot about places and buildings and people and everything. We're going to get into the book because I can't wait to get into the book. But do you have a weird story or history fact that strikes you as weird about Toledo? I'm sure you have many.
Well, there's many, yes. But I think I love the story of Vistula and Port Lawrence and how all that took place, and Benjamin Stickney, who came here as an Indian agent from Fort Wayne. He puts all of his effort behind Port Lawrence and then realizes there's money to be made. He gets Vistula and then convinces everybody, we don't want to be part of Michigan, we want to be a part of Ohio, and then the whole Toledo War thing that takes off. But the one strange thing that I find funny is that he named his two kids 1 and 2 Stickney.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so he had this belief that kids should grow up and be able to name themselves. So when they were born, instead of giving them a formal name, he named his two boys 1 and 2. And I think both of them grew up to just be known as 1 and 2, and they didn't change the name.
They didn't change their name. Okay, that is, see, I told you I learned something new with you every single time we meet. Do you get people stopping you well, first of all, I don't know if people recognize you or not, but when people find out what you do, are they as inquisitive as I am about, like, tell me something?
Yeah, it's funny. I did about a year with 13 ABC doing Finds in the 419, and people started watching that, and I would bump into people at different events, and I just did it the other day. I was at Jeep Fest, and someone came up and wanted to know if I knew about a bar on Monroe Street that had the longest bar in the city, and most of it they want to validate a story they've heard.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, so they come to you to validate the historical aspect of it.
I do my best, but I can't validate them all.
You can't validate them all.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Now, I know that we've talked about this before, like when we travel through the city, we look up at buildings and think about things that have happened there. And we're going to talk about people who have come to the city that, like you said, forgotten visitors. Was there a person that touched you personally that might have come to the city?
I think the one that touched me more than any of the other stories, there were two actually, but Frederick Douglass, the whole story behind his relationship with Lincoln and how it was affected basically by his visit to Toledo. Someone was visiting in Toledo when he came here to speak, and it was on his, actually this visitor was on his way to D.C. to meet with Lincoln. And they're having this conversation, and Lincoln thinks he's got Frederick Douglass behind him. And this guy says, I was just in Toledo. Trust me. Yeah, just saw him speak, and yeah, you've got an issue there.
You got an issue there.
Yeah, and Lincoln immediately invited Douglass to come to the White House, and they met, and it changed their relationship. And it really comes down to a speech that he gave here in Toledo, Ohio, which is, and I love the fact that he was here with Sojourner Truth. So it's a great story.
Okay, I know we're jumping ahead. I can't wait to get into the book. So let me ask you this: when you're going through your day-to-day things, how often are you going down the rabbit hole of Toledo history and things like that?
Well, it's interesting because this is a passion of mine. It's really more of a hobby. I mean, in real life, I'm chief strategy officer of a consulting firm.
Oh, so I never know that.
Yeah, so I spend most of my day with my head focused on the business, and then evenings and weekends, particularly in the wintertime, I'm just all in. And I love to spend time in the third floor at Main Library at the local history area. The internet is, there's a rabbit hole. You could spend days. So I would say it depends on the time of the year, but in the wintertime, I spend a lot of hours just kind of surfing and collecting research.
That third floor of the library can be a problem.
Yeah.
It can be a problem.
Yeah, it's a habit hard to beat. Yeah.
It's hard to beat. And now I know you said you've been a few different places. You lived a few different places. And speaking of the library, how does our local collection of history stack up?
I give them kudos all the time, and I have traveled around and spent time in other places and other research facilities. The one thing that I can't say enough about is just the staff. They're always willing to help you. They're excited about whatever you're researching, and they'll come back and just bring whatever they have and they can find back in the bowels of the library. And I think it ranks up there with all the rest of the major research facilities. And then I also have to mention the Kennedy Center is at the University of Toledo, another wonderful resource.
I just found out about them recently, about a week ago, and I didn't know that they had. I didn't know it was there.
Yeah, it's another place I could spend hours.
See, this is going to be a problem. All right, so we're going to get into the book Forgotten Visitors, and there's a couple that I'm going to wait and see if you mention, but there's a couple people in there that I cannot believe visited Toledo, and I can't believe you narrowed it down to just the few people that you narrowed it down to, because it
wasn't
crazy.
Easy.
I'm sure it wasn't. All right, well, we'll be right back with more Toledo Reads and my guest Ted Long after these words. Welcome back to Toledo Reads. I'm your host, Charles Welch. We're here with my good friend Ted Long, author of Forgotten Visitors, Northwest Ohio's Notable Guests. It's a great book Let's get into it. You narrowed it. Was it 25 people you narrowed it down to?
Just about, yeah.
People who have visited Toledo, who are famous and some infamous, and people may not have known. Give me something.
Just anyone?
Just anyone. I mean, I know we talked about Frederick Douglass, but let's. All right. Now this is one that I knew had visited.
Okay.
But I don't think I had ever seen a photo of the speech, and that's Dr. King at Scott High School.
Yeah.
In the 70s.
No, it would have been
60.
Yes.
Oh yeah, but it couldn't be in the 70s.
Yeah.
Duh. Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, it's an interesting story because it had to be reorganized. Originally he was scheduled to come, and at the time there was all kinds of issues and riots, and they had to reschedule. I think what I found interesting about the story is this is when I think King was really starting to focus his efforts on a broader message, a message that was less about race and more about the economy and economics and just the poor in general. And he was planning this huge program in Washington, D.C., this huge march for the poor people, which unfortunately he never lived to make happen, and probably the way it could have happened. But he was kind of practicing some of the messaging for that when he was in Toledo, which I found interesting.
Now, there's a photo, and I'm jumping all around here. There's a photo in your book, and was crazy to see. Did I see a picture of Harry Houdini hanging upside down from the Valentine?
That is correct, yeah. That's one of my favorites, yeah. Houdini was here actually pretty often. The Valentine was a pretty good-sized venue for that circuit, and so he started here with his brother early on, and right after they had appeared at the Chicago World's Fair, which would have been 1894, I think, and then proceeded to come in and out of Toledo quite often. Toledo was where he probably had his lowest of lows. There's some letters that we were able to use as reference and resource where he was in Toledo and was actually shut down because lack of ticket sales, and he at that point was considering another career.
Really?
Yeah, it was kind of the low point of his career, and it was at that point that he had made arrangements with a group out in Minnesota who had a larger circuit and actually a European following, and they were able to convince him, look, get rid of the small time stuff and go with the big breakouts that you do. That's what's going to make you popular. And before that, he was doing a combination of those, but also a lot of just regular magician stuff. And they were saying, no, you're the great Houdini.
Right.
So that's how that story went.
I wonder I don't even know if you know the mural that they have painted inside the Valentine. Is he on that mural?
He is, and he's hanging upside down.
Is he?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Babe Ruth.
Babe Ruth. Yeah.
Now, did he come for Swain Field?
He did, and that was another one like Dr. King where it had to be rearranged because in this case it was because of a rainout, and they pulled in by train, which I love the story. He came out dressed in a dapper suit, immediately was whisked away by some friends to a friend's apartment over in Vistula, and I think they played cards and had a few drinks. And then he did an appearance for the Blade, which I would have loved to have seen, stood out on one of the balconies and tossed autographed baseballs to 1,000 kids, and they were just battling for these balls, And there's a story inside the story of a kid who had some physical issues, who wrote to the Blade and said, look, I'm not going to be able to fight these kids, but I'd love to get a baseball. So they actually made a special arrangement for Babe Ruth to meet this guy and give him a baseball.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they played at Swain Field, and Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth both hit home runs. They played the Mud Hens, and it was from what I understand, a favor back to Casey Stengel for Stengel helping them get a pitcher they needed the previous year going into the playoffs, into the World Series.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That is, okay. Okay. All right, now I'm being an ungracious host by putting the people that I wanted to talk about, and there's many more, but who stands out to you in the book?
Oh, well, there's two that I love that are just characters. The one was Blanche Scott, who was the second female to drive cross country from New York to San Francisco. And she drove a Willis Overland car and was sponsored by them. And she ends up becoming an aviation pioneer. And just her story is fascinating from the start all the way till when I think she was in her 50s or 60s maybe, and she flew in a jet plane with one of the big, trying to think, Chuck Yeager.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, this woman was just a fascinating character. Would have loved to have met her. And then the other one is kind of similar, Wrong Way Corrigan.
I saw that in the book.
Yeah, just a great story again. And, you think of Wrong Way Corrigan, you think he must be kind of a goofy guy. I mean, not at all. He was a sharp guy. He couldn't get permission from that time, what they didn't call it that, but kind of the FAA, to fly directly to Ireland where his roots were. Instead they told him he could do a cross-country trip. So he flies from California to New York, then takes off from New York and apparently turns the wrong way and ends up in Ireland. But it was all planned, and just again, he had a great reception here in Toledo. There's a really cool photo of him, and there's he's given a fiery speech at a luncheon. People are all focused and enamored. It's just a great story.
Now, I want to talk about the big boxing match, the fight that took place. First, the fight was with who?
So that was Dempsey Willard, July 4th, 1919.
Now, there was an 80,000 seat.
Yeah.
Okay, an 80,000 seat arena it was built just for the boxing match.
That's correct.
Where was this place that held 80,000 people?
Well, it's Bayview Park, just before you come into Point Place. And the stadium was all wooden, made out of Michigan pine. And, I think the promoters were hoping to do future bouts here in Toledo. So they went ahead and invested and put all this money in. And these were people who thought Willard was going to beat Dempsey. And, of course, it went the other way around. And so things just kind of fell apart. And it's my understanding they tore the stadium down. It was all wooden, and some of the wood went for the cottages built in Point Place. Some of them went for a building that was built up towards Point Place.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And when I saw that, and it's an impressive stadium.
Oh, it was. It was. It was Michigan white pine, so the wood was pretty raw when they slapped this together. They were still kind of putting it together the day before the fight. And then when everybody got there, I think it was 100 degrees, miserable. And anybody who sat down on that white pine got tar all over their pants. So newsboys were selling newspapers for people to sit on or put over their head to keep the sun, from beating down on them. And then a lot of the folks were making money selling just wet towels for people to put around their neck because the heat was so intense.
And in the book we've talked about people who are, have been to Toledo back, hundreds of years ago. But even as recently as Burt Reynolds is in the book, Jamie Farr, just some new people.
Yeah, the Burt Reynolds story I love because basically what he started is still a very big part of Toledo today. He was the one, I think it was 72 maybe, that he was in town for some summer stock theater, was invited to Paco's. They said he pulled up in a red Corvette, typical Burt Reynolds.
Course.
Came in, had dinner, and then someone asked him for an autograph, and he just flippantly reached over and grabbed a bun and signed it, threw it back at him. And that became the standard for Tony Paco's today. Now you go into any of their facilities, and you see these autographed buns.
Okay. And I saw the Burt Reynolds autographed bun. I didn't realize he was the first.
Yeah, he started it. Yeah, it was no one else could thought of that but Burt Reynolds. It was just, and they say it was done rather, like off the cuff.
Just off the cuff,
yeah.
And he created a history that is purely Toledo.
Now it's iconic. It's part of the Toledo history.
It's definitely part of Toledo history. Political people, political figures who have visited Toledo. Tell me about a couple.
Well, there's a fascinating story that goes back to one of my favorite things that I love to talk about is the GAR event that was held here in the early 1900s. So this was the Civil War veterans group, and they had a massive parade. And I think I tell in the book, I think it goes from 11 a.m. to like 4 p.m. You know, it was, I mean, the longest parade I could imagine going up and down Toledo. And that was famous because William Howard Taft was running for president at that time, was kind of Teddy Roosevelt's hand-picked successor. And there was a lot of political intrigue that took place in Toledo that weekend. And I mean, to me, it was one of those stories I had no idea. I just stumbled onto it. And then you get into it, and it's Senator Foraker from Ohio played an important role in it as well. So those are stories that I really enjoyed just stumbling onto.
That's interesting. All right, so listen, let's take a break right here, and we'll be right back with more Toledo Reads right after these words. Welcome back to Toledo Reads. I'm your host, Charles Welch, and I'm here with Ted Long, the author of Forgotten Visitors. Ted, all right, now we've only got a few more minutes. Is there, and we're talking about people who have visited Toledo and people may not have known, have graced us with their presence. Can you give me just one more out the top of your head, person that visited Toledo?
One of my favorites, Mark Twain.
Mark Twain?
Mark Twain.
Okay.
It's a great story because we luckily have these letters that he was writing to his fiancée at the time, kind of describing his travels on his way to Toledo. And he was scared to death of coming to Toledo.
Why?
Well, it's really kind of a twist because you don't kind of understand it with the letters that he's writing until very end, and you realize that he's on his way to Toledo, or David Ross Locke, who is Petroleum V. Nasby, his pen name, is running the Toledo Blade. So he has this fear of coming to Toledo where all these people are familiar with this world's greatest humorist and journalist, and now Mark Twain has to put a show on. And it ends up he hits a home run, and it's funny because it's this arc. He writes all these letters about how fearful he is, and then he just does a great job, and then for 3 days he's writing letters, beating his chest, telling everybody about how good he was.
How good he was. Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, I know we said it's about 25 or so, about people in the book. Is there someone who didn't make the cut?
Well, I ended up with a list of about 40.
Okay.
And had to cull the list down. And to be honest, after finishing this, Yarko Cook, who's the editor at UT Press, he asked, do you want to do a second volume? And I went back and looked at the ones, and honestly, I think I picked the best 25. I just couldn't get excited about the others because to me, it's the backstory. It's one thing that Mark Twain came here. It's another thing altogether when you find out he was scared to death.
Yeah.
And why. Those are the great backstories that make things real interesting.
Yeah. Did Al Capone come here? I saw his picture in the book.
Yeah, Al Capone was only here once, and people always say, Al Capone was here or there. We only know that he was here once, and that was at the Willard Dempsey fight. Yeah, and he came in as Al Brown.
Yeah, and was there a payoff or something?
He was here because at that time he was also a boxing promoter. And it's rumored that he was paying off people from the Ohio Boxing Commission. And there's a great story. Someone said, "Do you think he told him his real name?" And the other guy says, "Well, they wouldn't take money from him if they didn't know who he was."
I saw that. I was like, well, they were pretty good, pretty on top of things.
Yeah.
So tell me, I mean, I know you've written a number of books and everything. What is next for Ted Long?
Oh, you know, I've got everything kind of piled up on me for a while there. So I've got a number of things coming out. I'm working on a project called Remarkable 419, or Remarkable Spaces in the 419, with a fantastic architectural photographer, Matthew McNulty. And that's at remarkable419.com or Instagram at remarkable419. And he shoots the buildings inside and out, and then I write the backstory to the buildings. So we get into architecture and the history of the buildings, and we're leading that up to probably a coffee table book in a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I'm finishing, Art Weber and I are doing a book on the history of the Maumee River. And Art is a phenomenal photographer. He's been with the Metro Parks for 50 years, has an incredible cachet of, wonderful photographs up and down the river. And then I've written an essay that's kind of the history of the Maumee from the, Ice Age all the way up to modern times. And that'll be published by UT Press next spring. And then I have a third project, Toledo Letters. And it's similar to Forgotten Visitors. I've gathered up letters written from someone in Toledo to someone outside, or someone outside of Toledo into Toledo, going back about 200 years.
Oh, wow.
And I take each letter, transcribe it, and then I tell you the backstory. What was really going on? What was, the story behind the letter?
Wow.
Yeah.
You find a way to make certain things so interesting, and I don't know how you do it.
To me, I just love to tell a good story. So if any way I can spin it to tell a good story, I have a good time.
We've got to talk about the Hillcrest one of these days, where we
Yes,
just
we
found
do.
out about
Yes, we do.
out about it. Well, Ted, thank you very much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
I like I said, it doesn't even feel like work talking to you, because
Thanks,
it's so cool to pick your brain, and I could really talk to you for hours and hours and hours.
Well, it goes both ways. I think your energy and enthusiasm just get me more excited, so the stories start to flow. So it's
I think
great.
we need to stop just hanging around each other then, because we're going to be a problem. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming by. That's my friend Ted Long. The book is called Forgotten Visitors, Northwest Ohio's notable guests. Go pick it up wherever you can. And we'll be right back with more Toledo Reads in another episode. Thank you for joining us.